You're listening to Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello. You're listening to Season 5 of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, using my results-driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences. I help organizations develop their best-kept secret, their human capital. This podcast is designed to expand the conversation with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development, and what it really takes to create, develop, and maintain results-driven and high-performing organizations. Our guest today is Sam Peters, founder and CEO of DFW Neurodivergent Family Management, a visionary leader, licensed professional counselor, and passionate advocate who has dedicated more than 25 years to transforming how we understand and embrace neurodiversity. With deep expertise in ADHD, autism, and various forms of neurodivergence, Sam approaches his work with a unique blend of professional excellence and genuine compassion. "I love people," he often says, a simple statement that underpins his remarkable ability to connect with clients of all ages and empower them to discover their inherent strengths. Sam's practice extends beyond your basic individual and family counseling, and it also includes comprehensive educational initiatives for schools, businesses, and organizations seeking to create more inclusive environments. Sam's mission is twofold: to help neurodivergent individuals develop self-awareness and confidence, and to transform institutions by revealing the untapped potential and unique perspectives neurodivergent minds bring to every setting. Sam, welcome to RDO.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again, Tanya.
It's good to see you too, Sam. You know, we've been trying to have this conversation for a while, and I know our listeners are saying, okay, she must have said that word neurodivergent, neurodiversity, like 5, 6, 8 times. What is she talking about, and why are we talking about it on a leadership podcast? So first question out the gate, neurodiversity is the concept of neurological differences. How are they recognized and respected as any other person, human being, right? Yeah. How would you expand on that definition based on your expertise and experience working with neurodivergent individuals? So for the lay person who is like, I don't know what they're talking about today, can you simplify it and explain it for us?
Sure, totally. So one of the ways that I try to describe neurodiversity is, we already understand just by default, as soon as we learn to observe the world around us, we see diversity everywhere. We see different hairstyles, we see different skin color, we see different eye color, we see different body types, we see different levels of ability, functioning of limbs, and we see diversity all around us all the time. But one of the ways that I kind of tell people, when you're interacting with a person, if you kind of, we use the person as a computer analogy a lot with people. But if you think of a person as a computer, if we follow that analogy, the things you see in front of you and the back and forth that you get, that's the user interface, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like the operating system of the person, right? You see the icons; those are the things that are visible. You click on the right icon; these are the things you can see. What's happening underneath the hood is the kind of the hardware, and that's what runs. It's what runs that user interface. Mm-hmm. Well, the hardware for a neurodiverse person is different. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the nervous system, it's kind of like the hardware of a human being, and then that hardware is designed or created or intended to work a certain way. The parts are laid out a certain way. The microchips, fasten into each other a certain way, and it's made to work a certain way. neurodivergent people have a different hardware than most people. So they have a different hardware, which means in some ways the user interface will be similar. It may look no different, but what's happening under the hood when you do those things is how it's operating is different, which means it can do some things a lot better than those other computers, that other hardware. It also means that there are some things that it might have difficulty. It's not made to run that software. You know, you got to run Pages instead of Microsoft Word. It's kind of like it's not, this font is not compatible. You got to find a replacement font. So sometimes you see some friction interfacing with other types of hardware with neurodiverse people. And the reason I use that analogy is because you don't know by looking at a hard drive whether it's Macintosh or Windows or Linux or any of these other operating systems. That Windows and Mac are the two obvious ones, but you don't. If I just show you a picture of a hard drive, you won't be able to tell me what type of operating system it's running. And so the same thing with neurodiverse people. You cannot tell by looking at someone on the surface whether or not their hard drive is neurodiverse or whether it's neurotypical. You can't. There's nothing on the surface. You would have to interact with that person.
Right.
And you would also have to know what, if you were a trained diagnostician, know what kinds of things to look for, which is one of the things that I try to help do, is educate people on what does that mean? What is it? What is a neurodiverse hard drive and how does it perform? How does it act?
So Sam, that's a really, you painted a picture for me, right? So, and you know, I have a counseling background as well. So, you know, I'm familiar with the term, but I want us to walk alongside, you know, our leaders who may not be, right? And what does this mean for an organization? So, research suggests that approximately 15 to 20% of the global population is neurodivergent in some form, way or another, right? So, when you say, you know, there's a mismatch or it may not line up, it doesn't mean that these people aren't capable. It just means they may need some additional support, right? So what are the most common misconceptions leaders have about the presence and the nature of neurodiversity, or, you know, what are their thoughts? What are you seeing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I'm noticing now, we've been talking for probably 4 or 5 minutes and we've been saying neurodiversity, but a lot of, if you're not familiar with that term, you may not realize what we're talking about is kind of this umbrella that covers things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, things that historically maybe you've heard called learning differences. Is maybe that's something that was back in the, you know, late 80s and 90s. Instead of learning disability or disability, learning differences kind of came more into. There was also a big move of like people first language, person with autism, person with ADHD, which by the way is kind of out of, that's, most people refer to as autistic. Or I have ADHD. Most people understand, because we do understand it's a nervous system thing. People actually are more, it actually opens people up to be able to more embrace that rather than understand it as a limitation or a disability. So that's an important distinction. So you mentioned understanding neurodiversity in terms of, and I think you were talking about this. The second question you had was
15 to 20% of the global population is neurodivergent, right?
Right.
And
so
what
15
are some
to 20.
of the common misconceptions do leaders have about the numbers and the nature of neurodiversity and understanding this population?
Yeah, I'm remembering now why I was going down that road. So some misconceptions about that. So historically, and even currently, so this is I'm gonna make a distinction, right? There is a legal healthcare system definition of the word disability, right? And then there is the commonplace parlance that we use out in the day-to-day, disability or ability, differently abled. We use those sorts of terms, just kind of commonly talking. So there's a difference. So autism, ADHD, dyslexia, all of these things are still technically, legally, in the medical healthcare parlance, healthcare speak. Parlance is kind of a $20 word. But in that parlance, they need to still be disabilities in order for insurance to cover important resources, things like that. However, on a word definition level of disability, as in or disease, we see disease for things that are wrong with somebody, right? So a lot of times I'll use the example of if a doctor detects cancer, that is a disease. It's because there are cells in your body that are acting like they are not supposed to act. They're doing things that they are not supposed to do, and they are causing damage and destruction, right? Same thing with disability. You have physical legs, but for whatever reason, you've had an accident or you were born, your legs do not work as they are. They have all of the pieces, but they are not working. The muscles aren't working. You can't engage your legs. That's a disability. Something is not working as it should. What we now understand through looking at CAT scans, PET scans, MRIs, as we've researched more about autism and ADHD, what we're noticing is these are nervous systems that are working precisely as they have been laid out to work. But it is working in a different way than the other nervous systems that we are used to looking at.
Right. So let me ask you this.
So there's a difference between them, but there is not a disability in the dictionary definition, I guess.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
How does that look in the workplace, right? So, if 15 to 20% of the global population is neurodivergent, and
these are different types of nervous systems. Yeah. So how do they?
I'm just going to throw a number out, and maybe, I don't know, 20% of my workforce could be neurodivergent, and I not know, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it's because of those misconceptions, right? So historically, we have viewed, for instance, autism. Historically, it was viewed as a primarily male disorder, and not only that, primarily white males were the ones who we were seeing diagnosed. And so, because we didn't have the science yet to really look inside the brain to understand the nervous system, that was just kind of passed along because that's what people were seeing in the diagnosticians. But what we have discovered through looking at those things is that is a very much a misconception. That whether it is autism, dyslexia, ADHD, any of these neurodiverse things, they are genetically passed along. So the chances of it, so if you have ADHD, there's a very, very high chance that whether they're diagnosed or not, your parents also carry either autism, dyslexia, either ADHD or some other kind of neurodiversity. Right. That kind of a nervous system. Also, what we're noticing is if you have one of those neurodiverse diagnoses, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, you are 75 to 80%, if not more, likely to have more than one. So, for instance, I have most of my clients, 75 to 80% probably, I've never done the math, but have at least two, autism and dyslexia, or ADHD and dyslexia, or autism and ADHD. That's a very common combination.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is not only that there is this overlap genetically, but there's this overlap with people who have it, so basically what I'm saying is there should be no difference in the number of women who have this versus men, or statistically, I mean. There should be no difference in the number of people of color that have this versus the white or Latino or others. So all that to say, there are a lot of misconceptions. So sometimes people will say, well, you can't be autistic, you're a woman, or you're not autistic because you're African, you're black, you're not going to be diagnosed as that.
Or you speak very well and you run the numbers.
Do well in social situations. And so that's what we're noticing is that not only does autism exist on a spectrum, what we're noticing is that spectrum is not a single spectrum either.
Okay, and that's where I was trying to get. That's where
three-dimensional.
That's where I wanted to get you to. Is the misconception that leaders may feel about that, because scientifically, like you gave us the science, right? But leaders don't care about the science unless they're in the science industry. They want to know, is this a good worker? Are they doing the work? Why do I need to care about this?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and I wanted to make sure that we got back around to
What are those?
that
Yeah.
last sentence.
Yeah. So some of them,
because
go ahead. Yeah.
leaders, I want leaders to take away from this conversation is, hey, we need a level of awareness, right? A level of awareness, and you can throw all the titles, all the letters out of the window, but you still have these people in a part of your workforce. And how do we support them? How do we support them, and how do we work with them, and how do we know that they're valued? So
So the first thing I want to tell you is that having those people in your workforce, first of all, you do. It's 15 to 20% of the population. I don't know how big your workforce is. Unless it's a workforce of one and you don't have it, then you're probably working with somebody who is either has it or is adjacent to it. And that's the other thing that we're noticing as a part of what I love about this is that it actually opens up the discussion even more. Because if we know that every single person walking around has a nervous system and that there can be variations in those nervous systems, what we know is that even if somebody is not having difficulties to the level that might be diagnosed, they still have a different nervous system. And people understanding their nervous systems and just understanding that there is this layer to all people, whether they're neurodiverse or not, can help you be more understanding with your interactions with all people. So first of all, it's good for all people. Second of all, you do have people working for you. Third of all, that's really great news. It's amazing news, because when we understand neurodivergence and when we make those adjustments to make their workplaces more accommodating for them, more in tune, in rhythm with their nervous system, the more they are up to 92% more productive than a neurotypical employee. And they are up to 42% more efficient than your neurotypical employee when they are understood. Once you get that recipe right.
So let me ask you this:
who wouldn't want? If I told you, you can implement this system of plan, there's going to be an uphill. There's going to be some work for a few months, but once you get there, you're going to have people that are 92% more effective. 92% more productive and 42% more efficient. Do you want that? Is it worth that?
You want that. Absolutely.
And then the other part of that is that, sorry, I'm so sorry I keep interrupting you. I get excited about it. And I'm neurodivergent myself. I have ADHD, so impulse control, all that. But I did take my medicine today.
But anyway. I think it's important to talk about that.
Yeah.
I think it's important to talk about that. So the next question that I was going to ask you is around what you just said, right? Studies show 80% of neurodivergent adults want to disclose their neurodivergence at work, but only 3% feel that it's safe to do so. You just said, you know what? I'm neurodivergent myself. I got the impulse control, all of that. For leaders who are listening, you may have someone in your staff and you're thinking, oh my God, they're always moving. They're always jumping in. I can't get it, And so what steps can leaders take to create psychological safety around disclosure and support? And if you want to share a little bit about your story, please do so.
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing I would tell anybody who's understanding this for the first time, whether you're somebody who maybe you're hearing this and you're thinking, oh boy, I think I might have a different operating system, or you're somebody hearing this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. 10 years ago, I had this young man with so much promise and I hired him and his scores were off the charts but then he just didn't seem to mesh. It didn't work.
It wasn't a good fit is what they say.
It wasn't a good fit, or he had no work ethic, or he was lazy, or I don't know what the misconception might be or whatever. But all that to say, if you're somebody who's hearing that there are people in your workforce who have been living their whole lives. That's the reason I'm saying this, is that there's a backstory to this. And this is my therapist heart, my compassionate heart coming out, is that one of the things you have to understand is when you are growing up in that way, when you're growing up as, in some ways, a Martian living among Earthlings, you hear, first of all, you hear a lot aimed at you or directed at you. So one of the studies that is, I remember learning about this in graduate school and it touching my heart to the point where it's like, this is my people. I want to work with them because it was me. But the average neurodivergent child, by the time they're age 12, hears 10,000 more disparaging or negative remarks, either directed at them or they overheard about them from adults in their lives, whether it's parents, whether it's teachers. What's wrong with you? Why can't you just XYZ? I don't understand why you're always standing up and moving around. Why can't you just sit still? These types of remarks. So they have 10,000 more. And that's by the time they're 12. So you can imagine the type of kind of mental anguish, because a lot of these kids wrestle with this knowledge when you're different than everybody else, but it's not in a way that anybody can see. You kind of are really wrestling with what's wrong with me, because you also are, I don't know why I can't do this. Like so many of these kids, one of the things I didn't acknowledge at the top that I should acknowledge now, giftedness is also a type of neurodivergence.
Wow.
And I hate saying this because it sounds all, I was diagnosed gifted as a kid or whatever. They tested me, I was gifted, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. So I was one of these twice exceptional kids. Twice exceptional is the term that we use. It's where you have a diagnosed disability and a diagnosed giftedness or area. And they call it twice exceptional because you're on two ends of this bell curve and they're kind of creating tension with each other. Like I'm exceptional in this way, but I am struggling compared to everybody else in these ways. So you have this child who's growing up with, okay, there are some things that are really hard for other people that are very easy for me. So easy for me. And there are things that are so easy for other people that are impossible to me. I can't remember to do my homework. I can't remember to brush my teeth or make my bed, whatever, what have you, ADHD or autistic kid that you wrestle with them on.
Right.
But yet they can memorize all presidents and their favorite colors and every flag that's ever flown over the state of Texas by the time they're 4. Like, that's crazy. How can you do that? That's impossible. And you can't remember to brush your teeth, but you remember every single president. So you have this frustration. So these people that are working for you now are adults. They've gone through this in childhood of not really understanding themselves. Now, this is assuming they know that they're neurodivergent. You may have a lot of people that may not, or they know that they are, but they can't get a diagnosis. Remember, I talked to you about there is a bias in our medical system against particularly women and people of color. It is still, even though we have the cognitive knowledge that it doesn't matter, you can still be autistic. We don't have the institutional knowledge, I guess. Like there are still a lot of professionals who are doing the work who either haven't gotten the memo or they're not living it out yet. And so all of that to say, I have many, many clients who know that they're autistic and yet they cannot, either they can't get an appointment because there's a wait list 8 miles long for people that take insurance, or they can't find somebody who is truly open-minded and willing to actually test them for autism because they're a woman or because they're a person of color or because they're 36. And that would have, if you were autistic, they would have caught that in elementary school. There's no way.
No.
So they can't even get seen for it. So all that to say, it's kind of it's not as cut and dried as, oh, you have an autistic person in your workforce. All they have to do is tell you they're autistic and here's the recipe.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
There's some stuff. There's some emotional stuff. Anyway,
I was going to ask you, speaking of people, adults being diagnosed with autism, I have a colleague who at 50 found out that she was she went through the testing, right?
Yeah. Insurance
didn't cover it. She had to pay for it out of her pocket. She was really concerned because she has an autistic son. They just diagnosed her a grandchild with autism. She started kind of reflecting on her childhood, right? Now this person is by American standards very successful. You wouldn't think that, oh my God, you can't, what you're saying, you wouldn't look at her and say, oh my God, you surely you can't be autistic. But when she went back and thought about different things over her life, she was like, I'm waiting on the test to come back, but I know that I am. She gets the test results and finds out, yes, indeed you are. There was a series of tests. Look, behaviors, all of the stuff that's involved with the diagnosis. And she was just crushed because she said, had I known this earlier, I would have been able to do better at work. I wouldn't have had the challenges I had in my marriage. I would have done different things with my children, different friendships, and so, she's kind of been on a quest to educate people on adults with autism. So my question to you is,
what does that mean for leaders, maybe?
So it's if I'm an adult, right, a well-established adult, finding out I'm autistic, how does that work with me in the workplace? Or does it have to change anything? Or
and that's the other thing I was going to mention, as it does relate back to this. So I'm going to rewind a little bit. This happens a lot with ADHD people, by the way. Sometimes we are not chronological in the way we talk about things. When I was talking about that mismatch of like things that are easy, things that are hard, that kids feel, what happens over time is they begin, because they're smart. These kids are sharp. They're intelligent. Like I said, many times are gifted. So they're problem solvers. So the way that they solve that problem is they start pretending as if they are those things. Sometimes you see an overcompensation, especially in females. We see it a lot with women who go undiagnosed, is they become perfectionists. They become very high achievers. They never forget homework. They never skip their reading. They never get distracted or get in trouble, because they take that big battery that they've got, that neurodivergent battery, and they channel it all towards covering it up. Fake it, make everybody believe that you are perfect. So there's this thing, we call it masking. And it takes it's not always perfectionism. It's not always, some people do it with sense of humor, some people, but people that are neurodivergent, who don't know they're neurodivergent and who aren't empowered, who don't know what to do or have the right tools, they start pretending. And so that, I guess what I'm saying with that is, first of all, you may have people in your workforce that are maybe even very autistic, quote unquote. I don't even like that term, because autistic, you can be anything, but they may have a lot of symptoms, and they may have great difficulty on some of those spectrums, but you never see it because they don't allow you to see it. But they may go home and melt down.
Yes.
Because they are just, they can't hold on to it anymore. Yeah. So all that to say, you may not know it. Second of all, that's one of the reasons why neurodivergent people want to disclose, because they're tired of having to do that. They want to be accommodated rather than accommodating you all the time. That's what's happening is there are accommodations already happening. If you have neurodivergent people in your workforce, they are accommodating you. Yes. And the way that you want to run, and the way that you want to run your office. And so that's what I would say. And then, so to those people, I would say that's why you want to advocate and learn about it. And if you're a leader, like I said, they're using so much of that battery that they have towards making other people feel better.
Yeah.
That they could be using towards efficiency and productivity in ways that are work for them, but they're not using that power. There's a lot of wasted human resource that goes towards masking. That's what I would say to leaders.
So Sam, so here's my thing for leaders that are listening. Stop beating up people who don't want to attend social events. Stop saying they're not a team leader, a team player. I don't know if you fit in here. Stop that, because they could very well be a neurodivergent employee who the social settings make them anxious, or it's like, wait a minute, that's during the time when I take my mask off and I can have my meltdown so I can come back to work the next day and do the things that I need to do. We've got to really start looking at different ways of how we define what makes a good team member, right? And so I may not be able to go to a function and socialize and do all the things, but I can contribute to the organization in a better way, in another way, or I can work better in a smaller environment. And that's why it's so important to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So that we can better understand. If I go into another company and I go into companies and I work with people on training and coaching, and I hear people saying, I don't like going to these things. And it's not that they're not social people, but it takes so much out of them, right?
Yeah.
And they haven't disclosed that they're neurodivergent, and they may not even know that they're neurodivergent.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to step into this space and start talking to business leaders and people who are working in the workforce is because as a therapist, I got sick and tired of every adult client that I had coming and spending 45 minutes and spending their hard-earned money talking to me about all of the parts and pieces of their workplace and workplace experience that were absolutely either sometimes downright traumatizing, if not just straight up annoying and impossible to work. So I'll give you an example. So one of the reasons why I talk about it being a different kind of nervous system is because most people understand their five senses, right? And there's way more than five senses, first of all, but you understand the basic five: sight, sound, touch, taste, hearing, smell. So all that. So when you think about your nervous system, you have to understand that's how your nervous system receives data from the world around it, right? That's its input. That's its USB port. So when we're plugging into our hard drive new information, we're taking it in via our senses. So what you need to know about neurodivergent people is those senses, all of them, can be impacted differently, right? So some of my five senses so for instance, my sense of smell might be hypersensitive. Another neurodivergent person, they may be like they may not smell a thing. You might have to literally, put a skunk in front of their face to get any kind of reaction because they don't smell things. Other people are hypersensitive. Same thing with all of them. So you have all these different spectrums, and you have people that can be all over them, right? So for instance, to get to a specific example, I had a client who was working in a traditional office building, and these overhead lights that they have, a lot of people don't realize this, but they do emit a frequency. All light is a frequency, right? We know this from our learning.
Yeah.
Well, my client who was autistic was hypersensitive which meant they could hear frequencies that other people can't hear. And so literally the lights in their office are literally making a constant sound all day on their ears, and they're trying to focus on their computer or can't focus. Had tried multiple times to talk with bosses, to talk with people, and they're just, what are you talking about? They had people come over and sit in her section all day to observe her, to see about these sounds. And I heard, I noticed she was grimacing, but no sound was observed by the listener. Confirmed with someone else nearby. They could not hear it either. So they're basically creating this paper trail they wanted to fire her for lack of productivity. She's trying to be honest about the reasons why, but now they've created this. And so that makes it even harder for her to work. As you can imagine, she's now concerned about these people, so basically she's being treated like this terrible person.
Right.
And all of it could have been taken care of if they just either allowed, because she tried to wear headphones. They said, you're not allowed to wear headphones at work, all these sorts of things. So all that to say, I had enough of those situations, and I was like, I think that a lot of these bosses, they just don't understand. It's because obviously they want her to be productive. Obviously, it is much cheaper for them to figure out the light situation or don't let her wear her headphones. She wasn't even asking them to change it. But that is all solved and all this manpower extended, and now she's going to get fired. They're going to have to hire and train someone new,
Cost more
cross their
money.
fingers that they're not neurodivergent and can hear the lights, when all the while they had this person who was capable of 92% more productivity,
Wow.
42% more efficient, which I keep saying those numbers. That's from a study that was done on JP Morgan Chase's Autism at Work program, where they made it more accommodating. And so, like, it's all of this is just from lack of knowledge. If he just knew, if he just understood, and if she could just know that he did and feel safe to disclose it, because all the while she didn't want to say it's because I'm autistic. That's why I can, because she didn't feel safe to disclose that. So
overwhelmed by emails, scheduling, and admin tasks? Eva's virtual assistants can help you get more time in your day. They manage calendars, handle customer service, and tackle projects 24/7. Reclaim your time and focus on what matters. Visit the show notes page to connect with Eva virtual assistants. Let's do more. Now back to the show.
As if you're listening, I hope that I hope you're able to follow our conversation. I hope you're taking notes, because this is really important, especially as we have more Gen Zers entering the workforce. Gen Alpha is going to be entering the workforce soon, 2025. And so, Sam, I've got like two questions I want to ask you at the same time. So, well, the first one is more of a statement, right? We just talked about accommodations and all of that, but there was a Deloitte study that found 91% of executives believe mental health has a negative impact on company performance, but only 61% have implemented programs to address it. Why do you think that is? When it could be as simple as fix the lights, or stop comparing neurotypical employees to neurodivergent employees, right?
Right. Well, I think one of the reasons is because I have to be honest about this.
Mm-hmm.
It will take a more purposeful approach. It will take more bandwidth. It will take nuance. Like I said, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. You may need to correct for the lighting for one person, but then another person, they need it to be brighter. And so we're going to have to get creative about, because there can be conflicting neurodivergent sensitivities that we need to accommodate for. So we need to be flexible. We need to be working. So as you can imagine, that takes a lot of more complex problem solving, more creative thinking, more willingness to be flexible, more willingness to embrace nuance. You know what? Maybe it's okay for some, maybe there are some employees who are allowed to wear headphones, but we do feel like we need to maintain the headphone rule in general. And that means we're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
And that means there's going to be some people who they may be upset because why does Jimmy get to wear headphones, but that's not okay for me? And there's going to be people there will be people. I hate this argument because people are always like, well, what about people that want to just game the system or what? Well, so let them. If they want to say that they have ADHD and they need headphones and that actually makes them less productive, guess what? It's going to show up.
It's going to show up. It absolutely is going to show up.
And here's the thing. I believe people do well when they can. Even if there's somebody who's not neurodivergent, if they're saying they need something in the workplace, then let's listen to them and let's see. Because like I said, if you can help that, I think most people want to do well. I don't think people want to be. So if somebody's struggling, I think it's because for whatever reason, they feel like they have to. So I guess what I'm saying is I acknowledge it does take more of a purposeful approach.
Mm-hmm.
It takes having conversations that may be difficult. It's going to take compromise.
Yeah.
It might take your neurodivergent person being able to realize, hey, I wish I could build you your own separate office pod that was exactly specified to your qualifications, but that would cost us $7.6 million and it's not financially feasible. So what I can give you is shades that you can pull down to make it darker if you need it, and these noise canceling headphones. And can you figure out a way to make it work with the rest? And neurodivergent employees being patient with that, because it does take time to move large systems. And if you see, I guess what I'm asking for is let's start moving in that direction, and let's have a mentality of openness, and let's be honest about this is a new understanding that we're learning about as a society.
Yeah.
We're going to have to make this adjustment regardless. You mentioned the Gen Z and Gen Alpha coming up. They are getting more diagnosed, and a lot of that is because we do understand better. Right?
Yes. We know
so the
more.
Workplace, you're going to adapt anyway. Might as well start now and help your current people that are there. And I'm sorry, but this huge untapped portion of the workforce that's under or unemployed, it's estimated oftentimes that 75, 80% of neurodivergent people are under or unemployed. So there are these people looking for work.
Yes.
Are capable. And I can't believe I missed this obvious thing to point out. But I mentioned that creative thinking and problem solving that it's going to take to do this. I mentioned that ability to be open-minded and flexible and nimble in your thinking. Gee, I wonder if there are any people who are more naturally able to do that type of thinking.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are any people out there that might be neurodivergent and totally up to that challenge.
Yeah.
And excited to get it. You have managers who would be like, please keep that away from me. When I was a manager, if one of my executive level people would have said, hey, we're wanting to become more neurodivergent friendly, can you put together a task force and think through this problem and help us solve this? I would have been like, yes, can I work extra?
Yes. So Sam,
I can't wait to present this to you.
We've been talking about, workplace and environmental, workplace accommodations, environmental factors. I wanted to throw this out there. Environmental factors can significantly impact the performance of neurodivergent individuals, as we've been talking about. There's studies showing sensory-friendly workspaces can increase productivity by 25%. How do I increase productivity? Is probably one of the questions that I get as a consultant often. Time management, productivity, right? What workplace accommodations have you found to be most universally beneficial, right? We can't do it all. We can't change everything for everyone. But are there just a couple of things that you can speak about that leaders can consider?
Yeah. So what I would say is, when it comes to environmental changes, is first of all, just to understand that sensory aspect of neurodivergence. Understand that your employees, if they're neurodivergent or talking about neurodivergence, they are going to exist somewhere on those spectrums of sensitivity with something. Now, some of them are going to be when you ask them that question, what sorts of sensory sensitivities do you have? That, by the way, if you're looking for the right language for that, here you go. Take out your pen and paper. How do you ask? If an employee has disclosed to you that they're neurodivergent and you want to have that conversation, oh, okay. So what I understand is that usually involves some levels of sensory sensitivities and things like that. So can you tell me about what your experience is with your sensory sensitivity levels? Because then, so some of them, they'll be able, if they've known their whole life, they know themselves, they've had a good therapist who was able to help them become more self-aware, they'll be able to tell you, I'm hypersensitive to bright lights and the color red, and I find the color green and ambient or natural lighting very calming. They might be able to spit them out right away. This is what I can't stand, and this is where my love is, my home. They might not, though. If they are just now kind of getting in this journey, they may have never actually understood that about themselves. And there can be some confusion about trying to think of the right word. I know the therapy speak, but I'm trying to put it into layperson, any everyday person. There's a thing called alexithymia that can happen with neurodivergent people, which is a disconnection between their ability to feel physically what emotionally they're feeling and understand what that emotion is.
Mm.
So there's a disconnect. So
Yeah.
I feel some physical sensation, but I don't know if that's anxiety, excitement, joy, fear. It takes me longer to put that together for somebody who has alexithymia. So if you have just found out that you're neurodivergent, you may have had that your whole life. Like, well, I know that bright light has an effect on me, but I'm still figuring out what it is, because I feel physically different when there's bright light, but I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, or neutral. And that's a hard, and that's something they're going to have to learn. So what I'm saying is, when you find out that you have employees that are neurodivergent, it will necessarily be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
Because some people will know to tell you right now, yes, I'm neurodivergent, and this is something we can work on. Can I get some noise canceling headphones?
Yeah.
There will be other people who will say, hey, I just want to let you know, I actually just found out that I'm autistic, or I'm pretty sure I'm autistic and I'm going through the testing. I'll let you know what I find out. Somebody in that zone, they might tell you that, and then they might come to you 3-4 months later and say, I'm really realizing I need to ask if I can work from home more frequently, because the office, it really is distracting to me. So it's not that they're creating things to try to get favor, because a lot of times if you're a neurotypical person and you've always lived in this world and some of those things are super easy for you, I can understand why it would seem like this employee who's struggling to be productive is telling me that they're hearing phantom sounds from the light bulbs. Sounds pretty convenient for somebody who's having trouble performing, right? Like, I can understand where, if you're coming from that mentality in that world, I agree with you. On the surface, it looks like poop, smells like poop, must be poop. But I'm here to tell you, it's probably not.
Yeah.
And it's worth listening to, because I'll grant you, it's possibly poop. It could be poop. Investigate it. Give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, you've got somebody who's now going to work 92% more and 42% more efficiently, who's going to be, because when you ally with somebody who's neurodivergent and they see that I'm just telling you, they will, first of all, they're capable of doing so many amazing things for you. Second of all, they're hungry. They're hungry to do those things. They want to do those things.
They want to be in an environment where they can thrive. Oh
my gosh, to be in an environment where they're seen and heard and, oh my God, appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something.
They will be for you. They'll be with you forever, and they'll do amazing things for you. Sorry.
You mentioned something that I've written a note down to come back and ask you, and you kind of led to it. Many workplaces are ending remote work. And, I wrote down, what is the impact going to be on neurodivergent people? I'm sure that there are neurodivergent people who loved the opportunity to be able to work from home, who may have never disclosed that they were neurodivergent. We also know from data that people who worked from home were more productive, right? Of course, we're going to always have the slackers, but that was a small number compared to people who were very productive in getting the work done. So do you have any
well, and I want to even just push back a little bit on the certain number of slackers. We have to remember, I told you earlier, some people, when they've had that feeling of not being right, like they're not like everybody else, they will overcompensate and become high achievers, and that's the way they compensate.
Yes. Okay.
Others, especially this happened to me, so I can say this from experience. Everything would have pointed towards slacker if you would have looked at me in high school. And that's because I was smart enough to put it together that there ain't no way I'm going to win in this system. Because I was smart enough, I figured out the rules of the game, and I realized that they were rigged against me. There was no way I was going to win. So I might as well do whatever the heck I wanted to do. I wasn't a slacker because there was something wrong with me, or because it was because I was tired of playing in a system where I felt like there was no way, because it was rigged against me. It wasn't fair. You know, it would be like if I tried to, if somebody said, LeBron James challenged you to a game of one-on-one, I'd be like, sorry, I'm not going to play. Like, okay.
Yeah.
I would rather sit over here and have a Coke than go out there and get my butt handed to me. That's where I was. So I wasn't
that's the neurodivergent child, but then
so what happened was, what I was going to say is, when I started to understand, so I got into college and I started to have people I was able to have more independence. I had more freedom in my schedule. I had more freedom to actually explore what was going on with me, because I was not, I was diagnosed as ADHD as a child, but it wasn't like my family didn't necessarily believe it was a thing,
right,
so to speak, or at least they didn't understand what it was. They just thought it was, okay, he needs more discipline. That's kind of how it was, which was a blessing and a curse. I had very loving parents. They are well informed now. Believe me, with my job, they were the first ones that got informed as I've learned these things.
Yeah.
So we're good. But I didn't have any freedom to explore that or understand it. When I got to college and I started to understand it more, and I started seeing some of the upsides, I was amazing on stage. I could do improv theater like nobody's business and make people just roll laughing. Like, it was great. I was finally feeding some of those aspects. I was also almost failing out of college, but luckily I started becoming self-aware, that I started finding some victory.
Yeah.
And that made me think, okay, maybe it is worth it to try to play this game that's rigged against me. And I found motivation, not because I wanted to be Mr. Valedictorian. It was because I wanted to stay in college and do the plays and do the improv troupe and do those things. And I can't do that if I fail out of school. So that motivated me enough to pass. Then when I went to graduate school, okay, now I was passionate. I'm learning about human mind. I'm learning about human development, psychology, straight A's, no problem. Blew it away. I would have been the valedictorian, because I had the capability to study once my interest was engaged. Because my nervous system, this is one of the primary differences with neurodivergence. Neurodivergent nervous systems are primarily geared towards focusing on interest, whereas neurotypical nervous systems are primarily geared towards and focused on importance. This is one of the reasons why does this kid know every flag in the world and every historical thing about the Titanic, but he does not know where he put his homework? Because it's not interesting to him. It might be important, but it's not interesting. Right. So and when you understand that, you turn a neurodivergent brain loose on what it's interested in. Like I said, if they would have assigned me that task of helping human beings who have different preferences and different desires, how can they integrate? My special interest has always been human beings.
Yeah.
And so you turn me loose on that. First of all, I'll give you a better solution than any number of efficiency experts or human resources experts, because that's my special interest. Second of all, I'm going to love the work I'm doing. Third of all, I'm going to give you way better and more work than you needed even. So you'll have
more than they asked for, right?
You'll have plan not only for my team, but for all the other teams. And
other teams.
So all that to say, you gain so much by reversing that polarity. So that's kind of, I guess, I don't even remember what your question was. Sorry, my
question was, what were your thoughts on the remote work and the effect on neurodivergent people?
I think it's great.
So I said, of course, because of the data, everyone is productive. Right. And, I threw in that part, we're all, and we are going to always have slackers. We're always going to have people that are trying to beat the system.
Well, I would say you're always going to have people
always be neurodivergent.
Sure. And you're always going to have people, I prefer we just change the language. So you're always going to have people that underperform for whatever reason. Because sometimes, here's the thing, I tell people all the time, my clients included, neurodivergent people are just as capable of displaying poor character as anybody else.
Absolutely. And
Yes,
I like that.
sometimes people don't do it on purpose, but sometimes they do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
But even that, so what I would say is even that, even if somebody's slacking, you know what, maybe it's not the right time for you, and that's okay. And maybe even somebody's underperforming because they're neurodivergent and you just can't accommodate them right now.
Yeah.
And I get that, and that's okay. But you could still have that conversation like, hey, it's
Yeah.
not working out. This is not a good fit.
So we've talked a lot about, I think we've laid some really good foundation for our listeners on what neurodiversity is, what it looks like in the workplace. We've talked about accommodation. We've talked about really, you gave folks an assignment. Here's how you can ask the questions around sensory sensitivities, which I think is golden. We've talked about, a lot of statistics and a lot of data. And guys, I'll try to put some of the links to some of this data in the chat so you can go in the show notes so you can go back and look at it. So I want to switch gears right now and talk about, we've talked about the employee that's already in the office, right? Who's already working for the employer. The unemployment rate for autistic adults is estimated at 85%, despite having advanced degrees and valuable skills, right? So we're not talking about, the misconception is, well, this is what this type of person looks like, right? No, that's not the case. 85%, despite having degrees and valuable transferable skills. So Sam, here's the question. What changes do we need to make in the recruitment and the interviewing process that you would recommend to leaders or HR folks to tap into this pool of talent that we're missing?
Yeah. That's a great question. So one of the first things that I would say is, again, this is honestly the first step of all of this is if you have this option, if you already have people in your workforce that have self-identified to you that they are neurodivergent, or that maybe you just, that they have symptoms of that. They're very, very active. They're always up from their desk. You don't even necessarily have to say, I know you're neurodivergent. But that person that either or you might suspect, invite them into, if possible, a conversation. Hey, I was listening, I'm assuming you're listening to this podcast. You use this as an excuse. I was listening to a podcast about what we can do to incorporate more neurodivergent understanding. Is that a topic you're familiar with? If you don't know and you're just kind of going out on a limb, is that a topic you're familiar with? Whether they are or not, just invite them into that conversation and say, hey, I want to have this conversation with more people because I want to know, first of all, like how can we be doing a better job at that? I want to start that conversation with you because you're a human being. And I know that this is something you either have experience with. And if you don't have that, talk to your HR person. They may have some knowledge about it. If not, call me, make an appointment. I do consultations. Easy. I love to talk to you about that. So start the conversation. That's the first thing to do. With somebody who is knowledgeable, either on a firsthand basis or academically knowledgeable, whatever. The second thing I would say is, when it comes to, because I think your question is more about how do we get that talent, recruit that talent, or
so the question is, what changes do we need to make in the hiring process, the recruitment and the interview process?
Right. Okay. So the first thing I would say is work with those people. Two, think about what are the current roles that you have in your organization, and what are you trying to, if you're looking at hiring or you're looking at restructure, I don't know what it is. Either way, do a current assessment. Where are we not considering somebody who might be neurodivergent working in this role? When we outline this role as responsibilities and these are the things that this person does, what are the ways that we're not even thinking about neurodivergence that we can incorporate that? So, for instance, one of the ways that you might do that is by talking about, we are looking for people who have who have high abilities in creative thinking, outside the box thinking, problem solving, or people who are, we are looking for people who are open to working with all kinds of minds and who are able to work with all kinds of minds. Language like that is a signal to neurodivergent people, because we know that these are things that are strengths for us. And we know if somebody says they're looking for creative, outside the box thinking, that's what they're asking for. That's what they want. So that's the first thing I would say, is go with your current roles. The second thing I would say is, are there ways that you can work to adapt, to create specific roles that would be ideal for a neurodivergent person? I won't say that are only for a neurodivergent person, because now we're getting into discrimination and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's capable. If your brain is capable of doing it, that's great. But hey, this is a role that we're designing that is very flexible with the work hours. It's very flexible with deadlines and when things have to get done, because we want this to be an innovative type role. And so we want them to be, because we know a lot of neurodivergent people love deadlines, by the way. This is not none of these things are universal.
Yeah.
But neurodivergents who are more like myself, I work a lot better with open-ended, what could be possible, and come back to me when you have some ideas about that. Because then I'll be in your office way sooner than if you give me a 2-week deadline. Because if you give me a 2-week deadline, I'm going to wait for a week and a half, and then I'm going to start. So all that to say, that it's irrelevant to me. So if I'm doing a creative problem-solving job, then you don't, so flexible with deadline, things like that. How could we rework roles where they are already more ready for a neurodivergent person to walk into?
As we talk about recruitment and the interviewing process, right? Because, the role is already out there.
Right.
As just kind of listening to you, I think that we need to change the questions that we ask.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I would say,
what do you have any sensory?
Yeah. So
I don't know if that's crossing privacy lines. Right now, you have to check off all of these things. Are you female, male, non-binary, veteran, disability? And so asking, hey, we are an inclusive environment. We maybe putting that out there. Asking questions around sensory issues. Do you need workplace accommodations? Would you need workplace accommodations? Which is a question that I think could fit everybody across the board, whether you are neurodivergent or you just had back surgery, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then all of the
on
things
the
that you
practical
mentioned
end
about the recruitment of it really starts with educating yourself on neurodivergency and creating a level of awareness for yourself around HR recruitment, right? And then how do we ask questions? What are those questions?
So you've done all that stuff. You got the job descriptions out there. You got the resumes coming in. Where do we go now? So the first thing I would say is, don't have a one-track mind. Don't just be like, okay, we're rolling out our neurodivergent initiative. These are the roles we've got. Let's go see don't be trying to assess people for what kind of neurodivergence they might have. Oh, that guy bouncing his knee in the lobby, I think he might have ADHD. That's not what we want. And nobody wants to feel like they're under a microscope, especially a neurodivergent person who's already nervous. So first thing I would tell you is, if you're doing traditional in-person interviews in a traditional office, that like the neurodivergent person already is probably about 2-3 ticks more anxious and more more anxious and on edge than a neurotypical person, just because of the sensory environment and because of their experience with those sorts of settings. So let me give you an example. This is something people just don't think of. But I, to this day, a job interview, sitting in a situation where I'm in somebody's office and I'm in a chair, there's a desk and they're in another chair, I am in my head, I'm back in the principal's office and I'm a kid and I don't know what I did, but I know I'm about to get in trouble. So that's my mindset right now, beginning of the interview.
Yeah.
And that may be true for a lot of nerds just because of the environment and what it feels like to them.
Yeah.
So understanding that. So less is more. If you can be flexible with where you're doing the interview, go for it. One of the best interviews I ever did. I don't know if this person was trying to be neurodivergent and friendly or not, but they took me on a walk outside. Like there was a little courtyard and we just went on a walk. We were side by side instead of directly across from each other. We're outside from those lights that can make noises, but other people might not. So what I would say to do is, if it's possible for you, if you're going to do interviews, have options for different ways that people can interview. Have one day that is, if you prefer to do a traditional office sit down interview, here's the day to sign up. Here's time slots to sign up for. Here's the questions that we may ask, kind of like you did with me. We may ask other questions, but here's the questions we intend to go over. That's great for a neurodivergent person, a little peace of mind. I can actually think ahead to answer. Or if you would rather we're having panel interviews. It's more of a meet and greet. Everybody will be in a room together. There'll be snacks. Everybody's wearing name tags, and you won't know who in the room is the boss and who is the room. We're just going to have lunch and talk and chat or whatever. Or project-based job interviews. Here's what your job task is going to be. Do it. Can you do it? So many people that they don't do great with the social, but if you give me a chance to show you what I can do, I'll do it, and I'll do it better than anybody. Yeah. And just, I guess, being flexible and offering people options when you can. That's what I would say.
I think those are excellent.
That way you don't have to
strategies. They're excellent strategies that can be incorporated throughout the interview process for everybody, right? You just incorporate it into the interview process, because it's not like you're going to know off the gate that someone is neurodivergent. You know, as you were giving you're doing your comparison between, oh my God, I feel like I'm sitting in the principal's office again. The CDC said that 61% of adults have experienced at least one type of adverse childhood experience, which is called ACE, one type of adverse childhood experience. So, it just kind of really sends them back.
And those numbers are even higher for neurodivergent children. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but yeah. And also there's a huge co-occurrence of anxiety, depression, all that stuff. So yeah, the more we can do to make it more accountable, more accommodating, and more affirming, the better it's gonna be for everyone. Your bottom line is gonna do better, because these people are gonna bring great value.
Sam, what are you reading that we should be reading?
Oh, this is a good question. Okay. So here's the funny thing is, I'm actually a terrible reader. Terrible. Okay. But it just so happens that one of my things this year is I want to get better at that, because my brain doesn't like the act of reading very much. So I have to do it in different ways, because I'll read. I tell people this all the time. I'll sit there and read for 30 minutes, but I'm actually reading the same 2 or 3 pages, because what I'll do is I'll read and my mind will be reading, but I'll get 3 or 4 pages and be like, what is going on? I don't know. I don't know how we got here. Why is he talking to him? What? So I have to go back and reread it. So anyway, all I have to say, but I'm reading a book right now that is I'm not having that trouble. And it's because I told you that interest versus importance.
Yes.
So interesting to me. So my favorite book of all time has always been Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Love that book.
Oh, wow.
So there's a book, I don't even know when it came out. It could be several years old.
It is many years old. I read it as a child.
But no, this is the new book I'm reading. It's called James by Percival Everett. So get this.
Oh.
It's Huckleberry Finn rewritten, but from the perspective of Jim, the runaway slave that Huck is with.
Oh.
And it is blowing my mind in so many ways. And I know, I'm sure that as a white middle-class man in America, I'm way overdue to be having my mind blown about stuff. But yet again, hearing this story told from Jim's perspective, and I don't want to give away too much because I want people to be excited to read it.
Yes, I'm excited to read it.
But I love too. So one of the things that doesn't really come through as much in the Huck Finn book is it does come through, and it's one of the themes is how wise Jim is, even though he's this quote unquote uneducated slave. But when you're reading James from his perspective, Jim is very educated. He's like enamored with these books that he wants to read, and he can't because he's a reader. So he's actually having one of the things you don't know in Huckleberry Finn. He's having these secret meetings with teaching the other slave children in the area how to read that come to his cabin at night. He's very well spoken. He and his wife have intelligent conversations about things. And then when Huck is around or when anybody else is around, he goes into talking the way that Mark Twain wrote it. So it's so great. It's so great.
Wow.
On so many levels.
Oh, I'm going to add that because I'm sure that there are leadership lessons, life lessons, and just lessons in general that I could take away.
Well, and if you please, Dr. Tanya, Dr. Lowe, if you do read this, hit me up just on it personally, because I would love to be able to discuss this with a person of color who's going to obviously have layers or things. You're going to see things and hear things from this that I would probably never even pick up.
Well,
but I'd love to eavesdrop.
We'll have a book club about it, right?
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I'm up for a new book to read, and I'm going to look for it.
If you do, let me know.
If it's an audio.
They do. They got audio version.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've been chatting with Sam Peters, licensed professional counselor, founder and CEO of DFW Neurodivergent Family Management. Visit the show notes to see how to connect with Sam, join his community. While you are in the show notes, be sure to grab my newest book, The Power of One Question, and our 2025 Leaders Reading List. Our special gift to you for being a valuable listener. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. For all resources mentioned today, guest contact information, Dr. Tanya's results driven books, and your free gift, visit the show notes. We're dedicated to helping you create results driven transformation. Until next time.